Hello and welcome to Caged In Presents Coppola Connections, brought to you by the Breadcrumbs Collective and hosted by me, Petros Patsilivus. Seeing as it's the run-up to Christmas and for MCU fans, Marvel Studios are giving you a nice little Christmas treat of Spider-Man No Way Home, I thought no better time to jump in and talk about The Amazing Spider-Man. I think the only superhero film that has a Coppola connection, and felt very fitting for this. This is obviously episode 25. As I said, the film is The Amazing Spider-Man from 2012, and my guest for this episode is the amazing Andrew Gaudion. I absolutely loved this conversation, and I'm sure you will too. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, what we do over here on Coppola Connections is watch every single film in the collective Coppola family filmography to determine, are they the greatest film family of all time, based on this single film alone. So I get my guests to just have a rambly chat about the Coppola family, how they got to know them, deep dive into this film, and then make a judgment call. Does this film make them the greatest film family of all time? We will be down in the sewers with this movie, talking all spoilers, shooting webs at all the plot points of this movie. So if you haven't seen it, now's your time to duck out. If you want to watch this film, you can head on over to Netflix in the UK, where this is streaming right now. So I guess all that's left to do is to get bitten by a radioactive spider, avenge the death of your uncle, climb up some fire escapes to give your girlfriend a little smooch, and battle a lizard man who has some ties to your family as we make some Coppola connections. With the release of Marvel's Spider-Man No Way Home tomorrow, I thought it was only right to swing back to 2012 and look at another outing of everyone's favourite webhead in The Amazing Spider-Man. Directed by Mark Webb, great name, with a script by James Vanderbilt, Alvin Sargent and Steve Kloves. This film stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rhys Ifans, Sally Field, Martin Sheen and Dennis Leary. And our Coppola connection for this episode is the film cinematographer, yours and my mate, John Schwartzman. Joining me today as we shoot webs at this film to find out if it deserves to spin a web in the Coppola Family Hall of Fame or should be trapped under a glass and thrown outside, is journalist and podcaster Andrew Garfield. Andrew, our promises you can't keep, the best kind.
So I hear, but I also believe that if you can talk about The Amazing Spider-Man with other people, you have a moral obligation to do that thing, and that's what's at stake here, not choice, responsibility.
How are you, Andy?
I'm very well, Petros. How are you doing? Good to see you again.
Yeah, you too, man. It's obviously I guested on your fantastic podcast, Ramblin, an Amblin Podcast. One of the questions I wanted to start off with by asking you is there any superhero movies in the Ramblin oeuvre?
No, there aren't really. It's not something that they've kind of hopped on the bandwagon, as it were. I guess like the closest thing you can get to is something like Ready Player One that has various amount of characters in the background, including Batman at one point. I don't know if I can't remember Spider-Man popping up in that. I feel like that would have been too much of a copyright hurdle to jump over. But who knows, in this kind of day and age, maybe the long belated sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit will end up being about Roger Rabbit in a month in the group of superheroes. Time will tell.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it will probably get the Space Jam New Legacy treatment, right, where it's just IP galore and just like it'll be. Yeah, there'll be everything. It'll be Batman and Superman on the screen for the first time ever. Iron Man's there, and they'll all be there. It'll be an absolute clusterfuck of
and
IP.
Roger Rabbit.
So yeah, on the talking of like superheroes, what superhero would you love to have seen or see Spielberg tackle? He might be a bit long in the tooth to tackle one now, but
I feel like he and I'm almost certain that if I Google this now, it probably would be a fact. But I feel like around the time that Richard Donner did Superman, Spielberg must have been someone whose name was in the mix, like coming off the back of Jaws, and like just for the very simple reason being like Superman being this kind of like symbol of American myth making and how that feels quite Spielbergian. But even to a point, I think Peter Parker, Spider-Man feels quite Spielbergian in a way, because it is like this kid in that about a kid kind of being met with extraordinary circumstances, which is a very Amblin trait as it is. Just young people being thrown into the deep end with something fantastical and seeing if they could keep their head above water, which is essentially what the whole early stage of Peter Parker's life in any form is, really.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the kind of the Tom Holland run haven't had like an amplification to them of like kind of, because I know that like, the Homecoming kind of had like
it's like a John Hughes vibe more than anything, right?
To it. Yeah. And I'm surprised they didn't lean into that, or I guess like I don't know, it's an unwritten thing in Hollywood to not tread on Steven's toes too much, unless you're Jason Reitman.
Don't go too close now.
So I always start off these conversations, Andrew, by asking, when did you first become aware of the Coppola family? And it's never more fitting to say, like a spider's web of a family that they are.
I must also give you a shout out for that wonderful family tree that you've made with the little podcast document that you had out. It's very helpful and just generally quite entertaining to look at, because you do just kind of go, Jesus Christ, yeah, I mean, they're everywhere. But to answer your question, I had to think about this a little bit, because I think the first Francis Ford Coppola film I would have seen was Jack, just because I was a big Robin Williams fan as a kid, but probably didn't appreciate it was a film made by Francis Ford Coppola in the slightest. But like when I would say I saw the Godfather trilogy for the first time when I was about 13, that kind of point in my life when I was like, all right, I'm into films and really going to get into films now. Let's tick off all the 501 greatest films you must see before you die sort of lists. And of course, like the Godfathers and Apocalypse Now, they're all in there. So that's when I started. When reading more, you start to really realize his kind of significance, but also as a unit, you soon realize how connected they all are.
Yeah, like, and I'm always interested because I saw The Godfather at a similar age. How did it impact you at that time? Because for me, I always look at it and be like, I've watched it, but I don't feel like I've really like watched it when I was like 13. I don't think I like picked up on like what it actually was talking. Do you know what I mean? I like,
yes.
Maybe I was just a thick 13-year-old, but like,
no, I'm with you.
It's a lot of men talking in dark rooms.
A lot of men talking, and it's also at that stage in your life where you're like, you're into film, and you like, whenever you watch one of these films that's kind of like heralded in one of these books, you don't really go in with like a kind of critical eye or like a sense of like being like, I'm just going to experience this film and see what I think about it. You go in the mindset knowing that you're wanting to come out at the end going like, yes, that was amazing. So you don't really have that eye quite yet. And this will give you a picture of the kind of 13-year-old I was. My parents were out like on a Saturday evening, and I instead of being like, all right, house to ourselves, let's invite some mates round and underage drinking to do all that, I was like, I'm gonna stay at home and commandeer the TV because I know the Godfather's on Sky, so I'm gonna watch that. While my sister had a sleepover upstairs, and I kept getting annoyed that they were making too much noise whilst I was watching the Godfather.
This is a really important scene with Sonny, guys. Can you keep it down? He's going to this toll booth. I don't know what's going to happen.
I've been promised guns.
Amazing. A left field question. Well, not even that left field. But have you ever met a Coppola? I know you work in journalism. You're in the film sphere.
I had to kind of wrap my brain a little bit just in case, because again, like they're sort of family where like there's connections that you might not even think to look at, like because even just looking at some of their individual names, you wouldn't automatically assume. So no, not knowingly is the short answer. I would love to.
I had a fantastic answer to that recently. Where somebody was like, I saw Phantom Planet. Does that count? Like Jason Schwartzman was playing drums. Like, I guess that you breathe the same air as Jason Schwartzman. I'll definitely take that.
You are physically in the same place. I think that will work.
And what would have been the first John Schwartzman film you'd have seen? I know it's kind of a bit of a weird one to say. Like, I don't know too many people who see films specifically for a cinematographer, unless it's
the big
Roger
names.
Deakins normally. Yeah. John Schwartzman doesn't seem like he's there going, oh, John Schwartzman's doing this one.
I must go out there. Yeah. The only reason I watched Dracula Untold, but going back over his filmography, I think the first one that I would have like seen as a kid was Armageddon on like VHS when I was about 9 years old. So like even like kind of looking a bit further back at that early point, there's some stuff in there that I like. Seabiscuit I remember seeing from a young age for whatever reason. It was just something that was on in 2004. And then also like getting into like Michael Bay when I was younger as well. So seeing like The Rock, Heathers, that was a big teen movie for me as well. That's one of his early credits.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, he is this like workman, like cinematographer, and he's kind of got these like really interesting relationships, especially with Michael Bay, because you can either thank him or blame him. He basically created that Bay aesthetic, right? Like he was there on The Rock, he was there on Armageddon. Like he
Pearl Harbor's one of the big ones.
Yeah, he helped shape that look basically, and I guess there's two ways you can look at that. You can thank John Schwartzman, or you can kind of damn him with hellfire for kind of
really can't
letting Michael Bay do.
Yeah, and you can't undersell that aesthetic as well, the kind of like influence it ended up having on how generally Hollywood blockbusters looked in the like early noughties as well. Like you think kind of the early Fast and Furious movies, or just pretty much like anything Rob Cohen made as well in the early noughties. All that kind of action, high octane, early naughty stuff is cribbing from the Michael Bay sheets, and a big part of that is John Schwartzman's overall look for those films as well.
Yeah. Then you kind of look at like the Jerry Bruckheimer, Tom Simpson like stable of films. Like he seems like one of the key consistents in that to kind of shape that look and stuff like that. And it's like,
I'm glad you bought that box set in the end.
Gone in 60. oh yeah. For those of you listening who might not know what I'm talking about, I had I recently posted a photo on Twitter of the Jerry Bruckheimer action box set, which is 7 films, which I think include Crimson Tide, Enemy of the State, The Rock, Con Air, Armageddon, Pearl Harbor.
I think Pearl Harbor was in there.
Might be missing. Gone in 60 Seconds. Gone in 60 Seconds. That's the 7. But I've recently found out there is a Blu-ray release that has the addition of Deja Vu, the Denzel Washington, Tony Scott film.
Indeed.
So like, I feel like I might need to up my ante and have to buy that as well, which kind of makes my Saturday trip into town, which was absolute hell to go get it, kind of redundant.
A fine CEX pickup there.
Oh yeah. I regret nothing, Andy. I absolutely regret nothing. So let's talk about The Amazing Spider-Man. But before we do, let's listen to the trailer.
How did you get out there?
Fire escape.
It's 20 stories.
The doorman's intimidating.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mr. Parker.
Not much to tell, really.
Peter lives with his aunt and uncle.
Did you catch that spider guy yet?
No, but we will. This guy wears a mask like an outlaw.
I think he's trying to do something maybe the police can't.
Can't?
If you're gonna steal cars, don't dress like a car thief.
You a cop?
You seriously think I'm a cop in a skin-tight red and blue suit?
Who are you?
I know it's been rough for you, Peter. I forgot all about that thing. It was your dad's.
Your father was a very secretive man, Peter.
Dr. Connors, I'm Richard Parker's son.
Your father and I were going to change the lives of millions, including mine. Extraordinary. How did you come up with this? There's a rumor of a new species in New York. It can be aggressive if threatened.
I gotta stop him, because I created him.
That's not your job.
Maybe it is.
"38 of New York's finest versus one guy in a unitard."
If you want the truth, Peter, come and get it.
I am issuing an arrest warrant for the masked vigilante known as Spider-Man.
I'm in trouble.
So, Andy, when did you first see this film, and why did you pick it to discuss on this podcast?
I would have seen this when it first came out back in summer of 2012, which was a big year for superhero movies because you had like the Avengers in the May of this year, then you had the Dark Knight Rises also in the July of 2012. I think these two only came about 2 weeks apart, and like it's not when you kind of compare like have it sandwiched in between those two, it feels like you often would forget to mention that the fact that The Amazing Spider-Man also came out in that summer.
Yeah.
But the main reason I chose to pick it was because I've loved Spider-Man from a very young age. He's always been my favorite superhero. I had a old double VHS tape of like the Nicholas Hammond live action 70s Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man Strikes Again and Spider-Man the Dragon's Challenge. Can't wait to revisit that to see how well that's aged. And then like that love only grew like growing up in the like mid to late 90s into the early noughties, because you had like the 90s animated series that was really cool that had like the like theme tune to it. Like all the Marvel cartoons in the 90s, it's equally as good as like something like the X-Men series or the Silver Surfer series. And then I remember really getting into the alternate comic book line that started in like 2000, and then that of course all led into the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi trilogy, which were huge movies for me when I was a kid. Particularly that first one when that was coming out, because I can really distinctly remember that whole discussion about the 12A certificate coming in because of it originally getting a 12 rating, and my dad was thinking about not taking me because I wasn't 12 yet. I was like, Dad, no. So I was disappointed as I was when they made that decision to not go ahead with a Spider-Man 4 with Raimi and Maguire and co, and they were going to go ahead and reboot it. I was a little disheartened, but at the same time, you know, this shtick happens in comic book runs all the time. So new Spider-Man movies, fine by my book, and I say I liked the initial kind of packaging that they were giving with, like, particularly the casting of Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. They're really smart pieces of casting, because he's clearly not going to do the Tobey Maguire thing, because he doesn't have the same vibe at all. And Emma Stone's like kind of pitch perfect casting for Gwen Stacy. And it looked cool to have like the Lizard being used as a villain, because he was always one of my favorites from the cartoon series as a kid. I really liked 500 Days of Summer when that came out, which would have been Mark Webb's first movie. Like his first movie and the only movie he had done before this as well, which is kind of nuts.
Well, that kind of thing happens a lot, right?
Yeah,
kind of
particularly this day and age,
like, especially now. Yeah, it's like Nia DaCosta, I think, is the one that springs to mind of recent, where it's like Candyman, like not even out, and they're like, she's doing the Marvels, like she's kind of like, yeah, and it is that thing of, I don't know, yeah, like Ryan Coogler, I guess, to some degree. I know he had a couple of films. He had Fruitvale Station and then Creed, and then it's like, let's suck him up into the Marvel like beast machine that we've got going on. So obviously you talked about your trepidation for this new like, and I think there was a kind of a bit of a fatigue from everyone, right? Because it was 5 years gap between was
Spider-Man 3,
the Spider-Man 3, and then this one, and it's I guess it's as much that thing of like Batman. It's like, are we really gonna see his parents get shoved into that alley once again and killed? And it was that thing of like, are we gonna have to watch Uncle Ben get killed again with this? So what were your first initial reactions when you saw this in July 2012?
I kind of I went back over an old blog of this, and like a lot of my feelings for it remain quite similar. But I think that trepidation the main thing I kind of felt initially watching it is like, even the film kind of feels that trepidation about going over the same beats again, and it feels kind of awkwardly rushing through certain parts. And I remember thinking it kind of felt like it had the shadow of the trilogy over it, that it found like a little hard to shake. But I remember liking a lot of the kind of tweaks to the way that they were shooting the web swinging, because I remember one of the big, well, I think even the first teaser was this one shot, like first person perspective of him running on rooftops and swinging, and that seemed to be like the big thing they were pushing as, this is why this looks different now.
Yeah.
Which then it doesn't end up really playing much of a part in the film itself, but I wonder if that's on an editing floor somewhere. But the main thing I took away from both back then when I watched it, and even now going back to it for this, was the pairing of Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone really do make it work, even when it's kind of getting stuck in its own kind of narrative corners or changing tact for other plot threads before kind of really exploring other ones. That they give it a lot of heart in a way, and make it give it that distinctiveness that allows it to at least kind of feel like its own thing, and not something that's having to work as a kind of shadowy imitation.
Well, before we get into the heart of this conversation and really pick this part of film, I always like to get my guests to give us a brief synopsis for the film. Andy, fire away.
I'll take it. So Andrew Garfield is Peter Parker, your everyday, socially awkward teen genius who loves photography, has great hair, and is really good on a skateboard. Peter has been raised by his caring Uncle Ben, Martin Sheen, and Aunt May, Sally Field, after his parents left suddenly one night, only to end up dead in a mysterious plane crash. Keen to know more about his parents, well, his father anyway, and what he was working on before he died, Peter sneaks into Oscorp Labs to get a chance meeting with Dr. Kurt Connors, played by Rhys Ifans, his father's old lab partner, who is working in the field of cross-species genetics. Wonder if that will come back up. While evading detection, however, Peter accidentally stumbles into a lab filled with genetically enhanced spiders. one of which bites him, quickly granting him the powers to do whatever a spider can, minus the mechanical web shooters, which Peter himself later makes. But when tragedy strikes, Peter must learn how to balance his life with the responsibility that comes with his powers, something which proves even more difficult as he deals with a burgeoning romance with classmate Gwen Stacy and has the matter of a giant lizard man roaming the streets of New York to deal with, who may or may not have something to do with Dr. Connor's experiment. And that's the Amazing Spider-Man.
That is a beautiful plot synopsis, and I've got to tip my hat off to you. I think you're the only person who's written one down. I'm calling you all out right now. I'm calling you all out. You did do your homework, guys.
I got
amazing.
the sheet.
So let's kind of talk about the. I feel like this is a perfect time to talk about Andrew Garfield and his kind of casting as Peter Parker and how he works as both Peter Parker and Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a lot of talk that a lot of people say like he's the best Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire's the best Spider-Man, and then maybe Tom Holland is like a kind of good mix of both. Do you know what I mean?
Right, yeah, that old discussion. Like, Bale was a better Bruce Wayne, but he's not as good as Batman. Like that old kind of nugget.
Yes. So how
he's got the weird kind of, like, particularly now that we have the Tom Holland ones, he's got that weird kind of middle child syndrome that's descended upon his portrayal now, where everyone kind of sees it as the troubled, difficult one. And that kind of expectation does work in its favor in a weird way, because he does approach it as a much kind of spikier Peter Parker who, like, as I kind of like made light of in that synopsis, he is a much like trendier, cooler, more stylish guy than like the Tobey Maguire one, who's a bit of a square. And slightly even to Tom Holland's one, there's a bit more kind of like awkwardly voice cracking kind of teen nerd trope than this Peter Parker is. And I like the way Garfield kind of approaches it as Peter Parker has kind of actively made himself more removed, and while you could read it as socially awkward, it's kind of like this kind of the trauma of abandonment issues kind of plays into his characterization, where he keeps him quite a closed off person, because even his relationship with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, while there is a lot of love there, he is still quite aloof with them a lot of the time in this one, which is not something that is characteristic of Tobey Maguire at all.
I guess, like, to jump in slightly to the plot of this, what I don't quite understand is obviously, like, one of my first questions was, how old is Peter Parker meant to be in this? Obviously, like, later on it is established that both him and Gwen Stacy are 17. I was like, I ain't buying it. I ain't buying that for 1 second. And then it's like, how nerdy can you be as Peter Parker when you look like Andrew Garfield?
I mean, he looks too good, right? It's
yeah, like I guess like the opening of this, like, just gives a lot, like, asks a lot of questions, like, well, like that made me ask a lot of questions in regards to like the certain things, like, if Peter is this kind of boy genius and really precocious and stuff like that, why is it's taken him till 17 to pay such an interest in what happened to his parents? And like, why is it taking him? I want to assume, like, in that flashback we get at the beginning of his parents, kind of, running away in the night and him being dropped off to Aunt May, must be about 7 or 8 years old, maybe.
Yeah, there's been some time.
There's been about 9 years. Yeah, there's been about 9 years that he's lived with them, and he's only now come across this briefcase when he's like at his most
random flooding.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of it felt like, I don't know, quite sloppy writing to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think you alluded to earlier that you go.
I was just gonna say that's kind of like my main issue with this film. Like I've got really not a lot of problem with the way kind of Garfield approaches character, or anyone really approaches the character. It is like you say, there are these plot threads that just, and even just the setup, it just feels kind of, and we're off. We're just go. Yeah. We're doing it now, and this is he's doing it now for reasons of finding a briefcase after a flood, and it's a case of like you just are expected to just kind of buy that it's suddenly a renewed interest. You're right. It is. It's not really baked into it in a way.
You might be able to speak to this more than I can, because I'm not like I love Spider-Man like in the kind of cinematic like world and stuff like that, but I'm not too much like clued up on the comic books. Do they ever like go into like the idea of his parents in the comics? Is there like this kind of thing, or is this kind of a total new invention for this film?
Certainly not really in the sort of ones I've largely read. Because they have popped up a few times, and there's like moments where there's like life model decoys of them recreated that to trick him into thinking that they're alive, which is just pretty mean, really.
Yeah.
And they've also been like secret agents over time and what have you. They've had a lot of like, they've been reused in like lots of weird different ways. But I must say, whenever I kind of come across it, it's not something I'm ever that really, but like it's not something that really intrigues me, having this kind of like mystery around his parents. What is more interesting to me is that it's just this kid who has had this kind of trauma in his life, and like a lot of like the best kind of Spider-Man stories focus on the kind of downtrodden, like how much life is just kind of shit for Peter Parker a lot of the time. Just like his uncle dies, he never knew his parents, and he's not someone who's got like a high-paying job, and he's often living from paycheck to paycheck, and like that. Those are the more interesting stories. So whenever one, and which is where like both the Garfield ones do kind of lose me a bit, is when they try to tie it into like this whole thing that like from birth he was meant to be granted these powers, and he was meant to be. It plays up much more in the second one about the fact that his genetic code is like specifically designed to match this spider bite and what have you, so that it can and that sort of stuff, which kind of removes like the everyman element and the kind of more relatable, like he's just a random everyday kid who gets this incredible, scary, extraordinary thing happen to him, and like whenever that starts being predetermined with like kind of a predestination element to it, I'm a bit like, nah, that's not interesting.
So in these kind of early moments of it, like we talked about, you mentioned how this film kind of like barrels along and we're kind of straight into it, but like when I was watching it again, I was like, I kind of clock watched and I went, we're like an hour in and there's no real villain. It's kind of like a lot happens, but at the same time, not a lot happens. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like they have to, I don't know, it almost, they didn't learn the lessons from like Spider-Man 3 almost. And
yeah.
Like, we're trying to put loads in there. We're trying to give the audience, this back story of his parents, and but we also need to do the origin story. And that kind of feels very like, I don't know, like thrown away. And I think it's done a lot better in something like Into the Spider-Verse, where they really play into that idea that like the spider bite is just like happenstance and really like an inconvenience. I think like that kind of film really plays into it with like Miles Morales like kind of going, ow, like just slapping it off. And it's like not as like in this, it's like he's in that room full of like the genetic
day-glow spiders.
Yeah. And everything's kind of like, it's all like, whoa, and then like, it's like you keep getting the shots of the spider kind of crawling up him, and it's like, we know what's going to happen. Like, don't stop fucking like trying to tease us out with it. And I guess it's what the MCU version of Spider-Man did quite well is they've
Yeah.
gone, we're not giving you any of that stuff because you know it. And it's like, I guess this falls victim to a lot of films of this time where it feels like we have to explain everything to the audience and almost like, I don't know, like spoon feed them, where it's like, this is an origin, like this is a new Spider-Man film. So they're going like, this is just like the comic books. This is a new run by a new creative team. They've go, oh no, we have to start from the beginning. We have to give you the origin story again.
Yeah. It kind of comes back to that like idea of looking at the Andrew Garfield run as like the troubled middle child, because it is like, and this is where that weird tension comes in of like that shadow of the Raimi trilogy, and it does end up impacting a lot of the kind of like key character beats, I feel, because I think it's probably perfectly fine for them to do the origins again, but like kind of commit to it harder or don't do it at all is what I think is the issue here. It kind of ends up somewhere in between, where it doesn't really properly commit to it, because it doesn't really do like the kind of like go for a body horror thing when he does get bitten, and he gets the powers quite quickly. It's literally as soon as he's been bitten, he's on a subway train fighting some goons and getting his hand accidentally stuck to a woman's shirt, which is a weird beat. And then the next day he's going on Bing looking up spider bites, and that's just kind of then how it keeps developing, with him hopping on his skateboard, doing flips and what have you, and realizing he can make these web shooters, and it goes through all that kind of like discovering and getting to grips with powers in such a kind of flippant way that you don't really feel the kind of exuberance or joy that you can if you do just kind of like, yes, you've seen it 10 years ago in Sam Raimi's movie, but this is a chance to try and do something different with that and with this new Peter Parker, and it doesn't commit to that at all, and just kind of commits to this more half-baked approach. And that, I think that also builds into Uncle Ben getting killed as well, because that happens just like he's suddenly walking past in the same place that the Peter accidentally lets a robber get away, and he's literally on the same street, shoots, dead, moving on. It's that it feels like the film's panicking about not wanting to like hit two familiar beats, but then doesn't actually, with those beats, doesn't try to do anything that different with them, and ends up kind of shooting itself in the foot as a result. And the characters are the ones who suffer more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess one of the things that this film does in regards to that is it has to make everything like come back to Peter, and it like really like just the weight is on his shoulders, because it's like Uncle Ben's death is his fault, Connor's is his fault, like everything's like his, like it's a lot moodier, and I guess it falls victim to that thing of like it's the Nolanification of Spider-Man almost. Do you know what I mean?
Even down to the color palette,
and it's a bit darker and a bit. Yeah. Which brings us on to John Schwartzman. So let's, whilst we're kind of clumsily segued, what do you think of the look of this film and the look that John Schwartzman brings to it?
I must say it's one of his. I do think it's probably one of his lesser blockbuster works, because I do think it's, like we say, it's kind of coming off of this approach to want to add some grit and Nolanize it. And like, as I said earlier, that kind of big thing in the promotion initially was this first-person perspective wall crawling and web shooting, which even then, that itself doesn't end up playing a part that much. And the film overall has this kind of like quite saturated, washed out look to it, which can often leave it feeling a little flat, and particularly when CG starts taking over, it's not the most dynamic looking superhero movie at all. I quite like the means in which, like, some of the shots that, and this is really more down to one, composition, and also just the means of the kind of either contorting the actor or a CGI recreation of the actor, the way Spider-Man moves and look, and generally how he moves. I quite like the suit. I'm less hot on, but like the way they kind of stylize certain moments with Spider-Man skews a little closer to like comic book panels than say like the Raimi run did, which I appreciated. But overall, I found like the general look of it quite flat and not, for something that's supposed to be the Amazing Spider-Man, it's quite, yeah,
it really felt like kind of going back to that original title of the comics really should have lent into that vibrancy that had.
It needs a different title kind of... for sure.
The moody Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like the emo Spider-Man. Well, obviously, like that.
My Chemical Spider-Man.
This is an interesting time. That's brilliant. This feels like an interesting time to be talking about this film, because obviously now this is somewhat, both these films are canon within the MCU, right? Because we will see tomorrow, day of release, that whether Andrew Garfield 1 is in the new Spider-Man No Way Home. And obviously we've seen that two of the villain from this film is in Spider-Man No Way Home, as is Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2. So, like, what are your thoughts? Are we going to see Andrew Garfield crop up in No Way Home?
It's the $1 million question at the minute, isn't it? It has been quite funny watching, like, Andrew Garfield field the question in the, like, Tit Tit Boom promotional campaign, where he's just like, look, all I'm going to say is, like, either some of you are going to be right, some of you are going to be wrong, and some of you are going to be really happy, and some of you are going to be really upset, and I am sorry in advance. Which partly is either just him being very good at deflecting from it, or it is he saying, no, I'm not in it. And the way he's kind of talked about his experience on these two films, I would actually be quite surprised if he ends up being in it. I would be less surprised if Tobey Maguire's in it, but Garfield in particular, I'd be very surprised if he ends up popping up. And I could see the film just being a regurgitation of villains more than anything else.
I've seen like some fan theories online and stuff like that. Like, one being, there is a moment in the No Way Home trailer where Zendaya's character
MJ
is like caught by a web, and like somebody said like that's gonna be the Garfield Spider-Man who catches her, as like a kind of nice like redemptive arc to what happened
I saw that
when
too.
Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And then there was like, I'm not sure if you saw the whole thing that went around with the Brazilian trailer with
the lizard looking like he's getting punched by a ghost. Yes. That was suspect.
And there is things in that trailer. There is like 3 villains up against one Spider-Man, but it's like kind of, it's framed as if they're heading off against, like the way they kind of are all looking, and the way they attack is like they have an opponent each, and it's like it very much feels like they should have not shown that in the trailer.
Yeah, keep that one in the drawer. Like, everyone's gonna come and see it anyway. Everyone knows. It's a weird one to me because yes, all the evidence is kind of more pointing towards the fact that they are both going to be in it, but there is just something about particularly Garfield popping up which feels odd to me, considering he's talked about how a lot of working on these movies was quite like disheartening, and particularly in looking at working in the Hollywood machine and seeing how these characters you can do, like I think it's in a Hollywood Reporter roundtable where he says about how it's really quite heartbreaking to see how characters you love and characters you know can really have a positive effect on people go through the kind of studio business conglomerate meat grinder, and just everything that's kind of more produced for the story is for the sake of selling something rather than kind of staying true to the nature of what people love about this character. And it's why it would surprise me to see him there in a big multimedia crossover of it.
or he's just really fucking savvy.
He's really played the long game.
Yeah, he's got people talking about like him and Spider-Man again, and then it's going to be like tomorrow people are just going to be, either foaming at the mouth in anger because they detest his Spider-Man, or they're going to be jizzing in their pants because they're kind of like,
that's a good point.
I'm excited to see like either way if they're in it. Like if both him and Tobey Maguire are in it, I'm going to be like, that's great. Like
that's cool.
They are obviously cribbing from the, like they're acting like Spider-Verse didn't happen.
Yeah.
Almost. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like No Way Home is like, oh yeah, we're gonna do Spider-Verse, but we're just gonna bring in villains. Like, and then like yeah, and if Nicolas Cage isn't there as Spider-Man Noir, I'm flipping a table. I'll tell you that.
Imagine if he is though. That you're probably still flipping the table, but in a very different energy level for a very different reason.
Yeah. I'm flipping a table like Tom Wamsgans in Succession.
Yeah, just
yeah. If you're a Succession fan, you will get that. If you're not, I'm not going to spoil it in any way. So let's get back to The Amazing Spider-Man and kind of talk about some of the side characters here. One of them, I just want to kind of briefly talk about is Rajat Rafa, played by Irfan Khan, who I think gets done dirty in this film, right?
Again, this feels like another thread that once upon a time went so much further, and just as a result, just doesn't feel like anything. Because another thing to kind of like, and I think you can really feel it in this movie, is the fact that this script, as it was being written, first James Vanderbilt wrote a draft when it was still Raimi's Spider-Man 4. Then some of that got taken over when they decided to reboot it, namely, I think, the Lizard stuff, because Sony was super keen on having the Lizard. And then that itself got a rewrite by Alvin Sargent, who had already written on the Raimi trilogy. And then that itself ended up getting rewritten by Steve Kloves, who was very much known for adapting all the Harry Potter films at the time. And I do feel like you can kind of feel this kind of three-tier bake going on, where someone else is coming in and certain threads end up tossing for screen time. And part of it you could maybe put down to sequel baiting, but particularly the Irfan Khan stuff is just so quickly forgotten about after one scene on the bridge. He doesn't... I'm right in thinking he does not appear again. He's meant to be this kind of shadowy Oscorp figure that's kind of trying to push Kurt Connors to make a cure for a dying Norman Osborn. Something which does end up playing a part more in part 2, but Khan isn't back, so who knows what happened to him.
Yeah, that is bizarre, and I kind of like. I know it's a very well trodden trope in films, but I almost really like that thing when a film goes for, it's not the supernatural villain who is the true evil.
Yeah.
It is kind of man themselves, and it kind of felt like that was a really interesting angle they could have pulled for this, like being like, this is a world of the fantastical with a kind of web shooting superhero and a lizard man, but really like it's the pressures of kind of corporate and kind of science to push things forward that has driven Kurt Connors to kind of becoming like this. And they kind of touch on it ever so slightly, I think, like, because you get that scene where it's Irfan Khan kind of says to him, like, you either start human trials now or like, well, like now or else. And he kind of threatens him, being like, you know what happened to Robert Parker when he kind of crossed us, like.
And it's even like the point where they're like, just in case you didn't get that this man's sinister, we're also going to have him say the line, oh, we're going to just go take this down to the Veterans Hospital and start testing it on people here. It's like, just in case you didn't get he was evil, here's an evil thing he's going to do.
And it gets much more to like an American audience as well, like especially a certain demographic of American audience. That line would have been like foaming at the mouth.
Not our veterans.
The veterans. They've done enough for this country. They don't deserve this.
They don't deserve to be made lizard men.
Who knows? Depending on what blogs you're reading, some people believe they already are.
Again, yeah. Why did they play that in? Have Kirk Connors be running for president of the United States? He turns into a lizard. But again,
He's just like you could read this as like Kirk Connors is some kind of like leader of like a QAnon faction or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like some kind of like.
We'll see tomorrow. Maybe he is now.
Breeding the next lizard. Who knows? So yeah, it's got more minor characters, and I feel like Aunt May doesn't really get time to shine in this. But what do you think of Sally Field's performance as Aunt May?
I like Sally Field a lot in general, and I watched the second one of this again after I watched the first one for prep for this, just to whilst I was on the wagon, and she's given so much more to do in the second one, and there's so much more fleshed out in that of their relationship in the second one, because I think they end up looking at this and going, oh, we didn't do anything with Aunt May.
Yeah, we did it dirty. The one scene we do get is like, I think it's quite, the thing is, for all this film's flaws, it's got some like quite tender moments. And
yes.
I love this moment that you get between Peter and Aunt May.
What a pretty girl.
Yeah. That's what Uncle Ben said.
Did you ask her out? Why?
Can't.
Why?
I'm just no good for her.
Peter Parker, if there's one thing you are, it's good. Anyone has a problem with that can talk to me.
I do like that.
See, that
is nice. And there's a couple beats like that. You're right.
Yeah.
There's also that beat near the end where like he's starting to kind of realize the responsibility he still has to her, and he's like coming back after being like properly like battered and bruised after fighting a lizard, but he has remembered the carton of eggs this time. And they just have like a quiet moment where, and I feel like it's the film, and they do kind of play on it a bit more in the second one, that Aunt May kind of knows but isn't telling him. And again, it's an element that's always existed where you get the sense that she kind of knows. But again, there's something about her characterization in this where it feels like they're trying to play up a part of the character that hasn't really been played up in the Sam Raimi movies at all, in that she's not his maternal, like as in she's not blood related to Peter Parker. She's related to him through marriage. Uncle Ben is his dad's brother.
Uh-huh.
So there's initially a part where I thought the film is kind of explore that, maybe that separation, and how that suddenly the two of them are having to kind of be alone as a unit, and addressing the kind of the fact that like there's more that ties them together than they don't need blood to tie them together. There's more that kind of builds that bond between them. But again, it's not really given the room to breathe. But in moments like that, it does come through, because you have that kind of initial comment. Sounds like she's kind of saying it like, oh, who pretty girl. She's kind of saying it from a distance, not wanting to encroach too much until he lets her in a bit more, which it's nicely played by two very good actors. And yeah, it's just something, moments like that in the film do exist between those two, between Peter and Gwen, less so the kind of antagonist figures. They don't really get super amount of time together before he becomes a big lizard man. But you are right, those moments where it does let the emotion come in a bit more do play nicely.
The one thing about that moment though is it's like it feels like this film is really tussling with the idea of like, who are we giving screen time to? Is it Uncle Ben or Aunt May, and then like that is so that kind of tender moment is followed by this.
Peter, I know things have been difficult lately, and I'm sorry about that. I think I know what you're feeling. Ever since you were a little boy, you've been living with so many unresolved things. Well, take it from an old man. Those things send us down a road. They make us who we are. And if anyone's destined for greatness, it's you, son. You owe the world your gifts. You just have to figure out how to use them. And know that wherever they take you, we'll always be here. So come on home, Peter. You're my hero. And I love you.
I feel like that score is doing a lot of heavy.
Oh
lifting
yeah, that's literally Martin
in that
Sheen
moment.
phoning in,
It's
isn't
really
it?
playing into Yeah. So what do you make of Martin Sheen in this? Obviously a kind of made his name through a Francis Ford Coppola film.
Indeed.
With Apocalypse Now, and obviously now he's here in his old age, kind of sounds like he's just getting that paycheck and
Yeah, I
running
don't feel a lot from him in this, I must say. Again, I think it's down to a way that the writers feel a little the kind of commitment to Uncle Ben is a little flippant again, and like I said earlier, kind of barrels through the crucial beats, and like particularly that kind of last line of that speech where he says, "You're my hero, Pete." I just remember when I was watching it the other day and he said that, I was like, you haven't expressed that sentiment at all. When have you shown this?
Yeah. Because you kind of get it throughout the film. He's just like ragging on him all the time.
He's just
right?
really
And I
pissed
guess
off
it's that
with him
thing of,
all
like,
the time.
Yeah, and it kind of, like, the way Peter is acting, and that's the thing, the way Peter is acting is kind of understandable from like a 13-year-old who kind of like is maybe understanding his emotions a bit more and is kind of starting to realize the ramifications of his parents kind of disappearing one night, probably a memory that he still has. But like at the age of 17, it's like, it feels like that kind of stuff should have been like addressed before now. And it kind of like, it draws back to my point where it's like, why, like, it feels awfully convenient that it's the age 17 when he's kind of like, I don't know, a bit more like likely to become Spidey. Do you know what I mean? It fits the plot a lot more that he's now going through this kind of turmoil of like, who am I really? Who are my parents?
Yeah.
And like Uncle Ben just, I don't know, kind of gets a bit short shrift in this
Again,
film.
you don't really feel the weight of it, and like again, it does just feel like they're too nervous about being so directly compared to the Raimi run, particularly because across that whole trilogy, the spectral presence of Uncle Ben is really felt, which is something that like this two film run ends up doing in a really weird way in part 2, where it keeps having Dennis Leary pop up as ghost cop dad for a lot of that movie. But like, yeah, again, it's just like it undersells the kind of meaning of a lot of. It really undersells for me the impact that the death of Uncle Ben's supposed to have on Peter Parker. It's not. It's all technically there. It's just not really. There's not really a strong sense of commitment to it, even to the point where for a beat, it's following this thread of kind of Spider-Man on the outside of the law as a vigilante with a very specific agenda, hunting down perps who look like Uncle Ben's killer. And then that's quite an interesting look at like the idea of him wrestling with his responsibility, but then that all gets kind of shoved away and put back in the drawer and forgotten about when it needs to become fight big CGI bad guy movie and have a big fight on a skyscraper at the end. That much more interesting idea of working with a spikier angrier Peter Parker is just not given it. It's shoved away and just not given the space to breathe again.
See, I think what would have made this a more effective origin story is if they kind of like done it of the angle of him searching for Uncle Ben's killer and kind of like stumbles upon something that is a lot more low level, that isn't kind of like linked back to his past.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Oscorp's like at the front and center of it, like it is in the kind of Raimi stuff with like Norman Osborn as the Green Goblin. It's like, get away from that. Keep it the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? This kind of idea of like, he's got these new powers. He's on this kind of revenge mission, but then kind of stumbles into something that he's a bit over his head to get into. I think it's a lot more interesting way they could have taken this.
There's really like, again, all the ingredients are kind of there to kind of go that route, but it's just not like it's the other paths taken. Really, it's like to go for that more PG friendly summer blockbuster, big movie bad guy. But like, I think that the seeds for like a really good Kingpin story is here. Like, particularly if you are following this track where he is kind of going more into crime and people a bit more in the underworld. If he does just keep stumbling further and further into that, you've got like a really cool layered kind of textured tale of like corruption and crime in New York that you could bleed in, but it's something that they've done in the comics numerous times. But yeah, they end up going more down the route that you've seen in the Raimi run, which is weird for how trepidatious the film feels around that.
Well, yeah, you kind of get that idea that like there is this seedy underbelly of New York with this exchange between Peter Parker and Captain Stacy.
Is it assaulting people? I'm not sure. I mean, I saw that video with him and the car thief, and I think most people would say that he was providing a public service.
Most people would be wrong. If I wanted the car thief off the street, he'd already be off the street.
So why wasn't he then?
Let me illuminate you. See, the car thief was leading us to the people who run the entire operation. It's been a 6-month-long sting. It's called strategy. I'm sure you're aware of the term strategy. You've probably heard about that in school.
Okay.
Good.
So yeah, that very much speaks to that idea of
I want to know where that draft was. I want to know where that draft is.
Exactly, yeah. And it's the thing, when I saw like James Vanderbilt's name, I was like, you have written one of my favorite films of all time in Zodiac.
Yeah.
And like, your name is on this script. And I think he's been done dirty a few times. I think recently, I remember like looking through his credits. I think he wrote the original script to Murder Mystery that kind of like got Happy Madison.
That's right, yeah.
That was supposed to be like, from the sounds of it, was supposed to be a lot more akin to like a Knives Out kind of thing, like a modern take on the whodunit, and then got Adam Sandler got his grubby mitts all over it and was like, nah, we're gonna make a
knockabout holiday comedy.
A holiday I think, yeah. It's gonna be Adam Sandler has another holiday.
I think he's someone on Independence Day 2 as well, James Vanderbilt.
The poor guy.
Yeah.
Like,
he's hopefully doing all right now.
I'm hoping.
He's on Scream, I believe.
I'm hoping his obituary, like the top line is Zodiac. He's not getting any of those. You know what I mean? You don't want that the first line of the obituary.
Writer.
You don't want the Amazing Spider-Man. No.
Story by credit for the Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah. He's there turning in his grave going, I did one drop.
It was when Raimi was there.
So let's talk about the way this film is written, and I want to play a clip to give us a little flavour of what this script delivers to us.
Poor Peter Parker. No mother, no All alone.
He's not alone.
I remember laughing at that line when they, again, it's like, it ends up that's taken from that beat that we're kind of talking about, where it does just end up as like fight big CGI bad guy on a skyscraper moment, where it ends up going down this, like, because the Lizard is like one of these great Spider-Man villains, like of all like kind of comic book characters, like Spider-Man and Batman have the best like rogue galleries of bad guys to pick from, and a lot of like the Spider-Man bad guys are from this kind of, as you were saying, there's this element of man pushing science too far, and hubris of man kind of having to reckon with the seeds that you've sown, and being like literally like changed and then man as monster. It's all very literal, but like all that kind of rich thematic nature, and that like and again, he's just another character with in another film where it's not also acting as an origin, where you can kind of let the Lizard own a bit more of the narrative, like in a way that kind of Doc Ock does in Spider-Man 2. You'd feel like that would probably do more justice and allow it to sit more with the kind of approach that the film is doing if it's already established its main hero. It feels too big of a character to tick off in the space of everything else that's happening. And I think it's quite telling that it's like you hear like a big thing why Raimi and Sony ended up falling out was like kind of discussions about which villain to use, and like Raimi wanted the Vulture and Sony wanted a few of them in the mix, and the Lizard being one of them. And the Raimi run, and it's a shame for like Dylan Baker's version of Kurt Connors, because he has 2 films where he's already got the relationship established with Peter Parker, so he is kind of primed for like Spider-Man 4 or what have you to become the Lizard. And instead they just kind of have to again fast forward through all the kind of key character beats of the relationship between these two, and again tying it back into this kind of forced mysterious parentage question, and
he
again robs the character.
He feels like a second or third film villain.
Yeah,
that's what I mean. It kind of feels like the first film needs to be, and that's what I think that the newest like run did quite well. Is like the Vulture seems like quite a, like, as much as it is part of like the Sinister Seven and stuff, like the Sinister Six or whatever it is, like he feels quite low level, and the way that they like portray him as like his origin is like being a part of this cleanup crew. Have to deal with the aftermath of what like the Avengers are doing and stuff like that. Feels quite neighborhood, whereas like this feels like too grand and too like, do you know what I mean? Like you know, that classic thing where like the third film it's like, and it's somebody from your past. Like it feels like the third one in a trilogy where it's like that's the thing where it's like, or somebody who's been lingering around, like you said with the Raimi stuff, like they'd built up that character, whereas this it's like,
and it's also just the motivation of him gets so murky, and as soon as he's kind of going down and dwelling in a dank sewer, like that's when like everything kind of else gets dropped away, and it just moves through this kind of perfunctory big bad guy with big plan to destroy New York. Like his ultimate plan in the end is to shoot up this toxin so that everyone in New York also then gets changed into a lizard, which is born out of him like them just kind of going for the cliched, he's mad now because he's a lizard man and he wants all other people to be lizard men because it's the next step in evolution.
I really don't get like his motivation. Like, it switches so quickly from being like, he says to Ifran Khan's character, I will never like do that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like he kind of like really heals, and it's like the next scene we see of him, it's like he's injecting himself with the serum. And it's like, I just don't like, and then it's like, even by the end of it, it's like, what is your why is your plan? Not what is your plan. I know what it is, but why is your plan? Like, why do you really want to do this?
Yeah.
Like, and why do you have, apart from the fact that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, what is the real vendetta there? Do you know what I mean? It's just like, he happens to be the one person who's onto you.
Yeah.
And it's like, it just feels a bit forced and a bit just like, well, he'll do. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, really it could have been a lot more interesting if it was that thing of Kurt Connors was going after the Ifran Khan character, and it's like Spider-Man is there in between both of them. Do you know what I mean? He's trying to fight, like he has to weirdly for what is morally right protect somebody who is immoral and kind of like real world bad.
Yeah.
At the same time, he has to take down this superhero bad who's kind of like, yeah, and it drops the Ifran Khan stuff early and then just goes, Kurt Connors is mad, like as you said.
Yeah.
Like, he's mad, he's bad, and
he's got a thing he wants to shoot in the sky.
And I don't even get that. Like, so I guess this is a problem I have with films in general when like there is a kind of a countdown. It's like, if you have a plan to do something, why not just plug it in, shoot that baby in the sky?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
Because even that general plot beat, the very first episode of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon is a lizard episode. And the plot of that follows a similar thing where he is kind of having a battle of his mind and has a device which he wants to use to turn other people into lizard men. But that 20-minute cartoon, one, manages to kind of make the motivation a lot clearer and also gives him more of an emotional link that's all his own, because he has a wife that he initially kidnaps to try to persuade her to come to his way of thinking that lizard men should rule supreme. And like even that 20-minute cartoon does more for that character than like this narrative does, unfortunately, as it ends up again. It feels like there's a bit of a case of, as does happen with a lot of these kind of big property reboots or sequels, it kind of some of them can end up feeling more of an exercise in trying to maintain an ownership of a character rights or trying to keep a brand alive and in the cultural conscious. And this is coming at a weird time in like particularly Columbia Pictures and Sony's relationship in Marvel, as the MCU is hitting that first peak with the first Avengers, and now they're suddenly like, we still have Spider-Man, he's ours.
Yeah, well, looking through the credits, Kevin Feige is like an executive producer on this film. So like, it is interesting that like he kind of has some involvement.
Yeah,
I'm not
there
sure
was, because
how that works.
It would have dated back to work because he started working at Marvel in the 90s, so he's got a exec credit on all the like early X-Men's and Raimi Spider-Mans. So he would have been someone I imagined, because of his involvement with the development of when it was still a Raimi movie, he would have to kind of have that credit. But I even remember at the time they were having discussions about maybe dropping in the Avengers skyscraper in the New York skyline to start like weaving in some ties. But again, this was at a point where just before that kind of Sony email hack, where a lot of things were clearly at a boiling point amongst Sony execs, so nothing ever really got through until kind of after that watershed moment.
So we kind of skirted around talking about the lizard, but what do you think of Rhys Ifans' portrayal?
Yeah, again, it's a shame because he's a good actor who's like, I think he's doing absolutely the best he can with the material he's given, that goes from this kind of initially setting up this quite caring, thoughtful, sensitive scientist that then just ends up barreling into a very cliched I'm evil scientist, and even like that clip there, which is so just like pure like pantomime villain sort of approach that just doesn't sit with the tone or that has been established earlier in the film.
And this moment, right, when it's like where most films would put a seed of doubt in the lead character's mind of like is the person that they kind of are involved with slightly like that know could be the villain. They just like signpost it and go, this guy's the villain with this delivery right here.
There's a rumor of a new species in New York. Beautiful and quite large.
What do you know about it? You seen it?
No, it's not yet classified. But it can be aggressive. If threatened.
So that scene is just like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's pure. It's now pure
like,
down in Universal horror movie monster sort of Jekyll and Hyde mode at that juncture, isn't it?
One thing from that scene that I was like devastated that never saw a return is that like mutant lizard mouse.
Yeah, that is
like, why don't we get like a reprise of that in like the final act?
Like, I really hope
like,
he webbed up that mouse so it's not getting anywhere, because that looked vicious.
Yeah, it looked terrifying. I was like, that's like, and that's the thing. Like, this film, I imagine even at a 12A, could really lend into the body horror.
Yeah, particularly with the lizard, right?
Yeah, that.
One of my notes for just that first transformation bit is just crusty, slimy arm.
Yeah, like all of that stuff, and then we get that like it's clearly like a prosthetic because it's larger than a human hand when he peels off the crust. And he's got this kind of like, I don't know, like looks like latex. He's got this like latex hand there. And it's like, hello, I've got my arm back. And I don't know, I think, yeah, I think the lizard was. And what do you think of the character design? Like the design
it's
of
very
the lizard as well, kind of
very strange because I feel like they're kind of looking at like the version of the character's got like kind of like a bit, the version of the character in comic books and cartoons has like a big snout and he's much more scaly. I like that they keep the lab coat for a little bit at least, but like I get on a design level that they kind of want to get rid of that snout and put it so it's slightly more human face, but they still do this thing where they keep the lipless mouth, I should say, very long and long across his face, so that even when he talks, he can't. Mm-hmm. It's not helping like a performance come through really at all, and it just ends up looking kind of. Again, it feels like something that's in between certain designs or in between certain drafts that doesn't really feel like they've come to a coherent final place on it. It feels odd to me. It looks a lot like the like Koopa Troopers in the old Super Mario Brothers movie with Bob Hoskins and.
Oh man, that was literally on the tip of my tongue. That was on the tip of my. All I was thinking every time it's on the screen was like, yeah, this is Super Mario Bros. Yeah, this is Super Mario, like down to like I couldn't get it out of my head, and it's like that thing of. I don't know, Matt. Like even with No Way Home, I'm like they've had to have like
readdressed
stayed with that as well. Yeah, it's like please readdress it slightly because it was a bit hokey. So one person we talked about briefly was Dennis Leary in this film, and before we kind of talk about his performance, I just want to play a clip of his swan song moment.
You're gonna make enemies. People will get hurt. Sometimes the people closest to you. So I want you to promise me something, okay? Leave Gwen out of it. Promise me that. Huh? You promise me. Oh.
What are your thoughts on Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy in this, Andy?
I just like most of the time throughout this whole film, I just kept going, Christ, he's a prick.
Yeah, I think the casting of Dennis Leary in anything, like, because
yeah, he is
all I remember of Dennis Leary is like the top 100 greatest comedians that would have played when I was about 10, 11 years old on like BBC 4, always around Christmas. And there was that thing, and kind of knowing him as this guy who just aped like Bill Hicks and just chain smoking on stage, like really angry all the time, going like, I tell you fucking what, man. I tell you what, man. Like just this like, and it's kind of perfect casting, but it's like, he's too much of a prick.
Yeah.
Like and his turnaround as a character in this of like being like, arrest Spider-Man. He kind of feels like he's the police captain and James Jonah Jameson rolled into one character.
They do kind of
like,
fold them in, don't they? There was one line in particular that was like, and again, it's not really Dennis Leary's fault, but like, yeah, he's a dude. He's a questionable dude anyway. We won't get into that, but like,
he's a real James Woods.
Yeah. There's one line that is like, it's as the police know the Lizard's in New York and he's dangerous and he's going out to do something that's going to harm a lot of people. And one of the first things they do when they turn up the scene is Captain Stacy just shouts, "I want Spider-Man off the streets." And I'm like, I think there's a bigger thing to deal with here right now, Captain Stacy. Yeah. Leave Spider-Man alone, please prioritize.
I love this moment when the when the Lizard is taking over Oscorp.
Well, Paul, if I didn't see it, I wouldn't believe it. I won't venture to say exactly what it is that's crawling up the north side of the Oscorp Tower, but clearly it is not human, and it is very, very strong.
That feels like the writers going like, we need to let the audience know that this is bad. It's like, we've seen the Lizard. We know it's bad.
Yeah,
like,
we get it now.
Why are you now giving us like some news correspondent or like some random guy in a helicopter telling us it's real bad, it's real angry?
It reminds me of like this weird. There's even a weird bit in Spider-Man 3. I don't know how well you remember Spider-Man 3, but the big battle at the end between everyone. There's just this random British woman reporter down on the ground who's just going, "Oh no, Spider-Man's really in trouble now. This might be the end of Spider-Man." And it's just like, why are you here? Why are we hearing this?
Amazing.
So it reminds me of that kind of like, again, it's that like you say, it's like that. It's a studio note probably worrying that audiences aren't getting what is pretty explicit and implicit on screen.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we've kind of ragged on this film quite a lot.
It doesn't do a lot good, but like there are some like really significant, like big components which are strong, which really do help it.
Well, yeah. Let's talk about a couple of those. One of them that like one thing I did not think when rewatching this was like I would feel anything emotional. And one of the moments that made me feel really emotional was this.
It's okay. It's all right. Hey, look. Just a normal guy. Right? Want to hold on to this? Hold my mask. All right. What's your name?
Jack?
Yes.
Let's get you out of here. Okay. Stay very still.
All right.
Okay, I got you.
So that is
really
Spider-Man
bring
saving
that up.
a kid from a car. And so Jack's dad is played by C. Thomas Howell, who a lot of people may know from Criminal Minds, who like plays like a kind of overarching villain in that. But like people in the Coppola sphere, like listeners to this podcast, may know him as the lead in The Outsiders. So a big Coppola connection with C. Thomas Howell in a very small role. But that scene, like all the other stuff, I don't give a shit about in that scene. Like the kind of like seeing the lizard. But there's something about that moment with like Jack that like I'm not sure if it's like the thing because I'm a dad. I was just like, oh, I got a lump in my throat, and it's a really affecting moment. What do you make of these kind of more?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that, particularly that scene up, because this is probably my least favorite Spider-Man film, but that moment with saving Jack on the bridge is probably in like my top 5 like cinematic Spider-Man moments. One, because like it's clearly a scene that means a lot to Andrew Garfield to get to play as Spider-Man, because it's quite a significant scene for his Peter Parker's growth into kind of starting to accept the kind of responsibility he has. And it has that moment where he's like, he takes off his mask so that Jack can see his face, so he isn't scared by him, and hands Jack the mask and says like, "Put this on; it will make you strong." To encourage, it's a really lovely beat of just like the kind of pure-hearted nature of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and also just the kind speaks to the kind of strength that Andrew Garfield is talking about in that Hollywood Reporter roundtable. The kind of symbolic nature of these kind of characters for kids and for people when they're growing up. In particular, it's a really, really, really strong moment in this film.
Yeah. It really reminded me of that MJ speech in Into the Spider-Verse, where she kind of mentions that like anyone can kind of put on the mask, like kind of thing. Anyone can be like a hero and stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think like that is one of the crowning things of Spider-Man, is that like he feels so like every day. Do you know what I mean? Because he's like the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. That it's like we could all do our little bit to kind of help out almost.
Yeah.
Kind of like,
which is why the genetic blood plotline is so annoying.
Yeah. And it is that thing of like, because that moment really says like, all you need to do is like, anyone could put on the mask and be Spider-Man. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's that confidence and it's that strength, and this film very, very much flirts with that idea of like, I don't know, like just, and it really shits the bed with it as well, because it's like, it is that thing of like, you could find confidence in yourself by like kind of self-betterment and stuff like that, but it's, if anything, this film kind of says it like, you need to get bit by a spider and all your problems will be solved. You'll be irresistible to the girl you fancy. Like, you'll be able to deal with the bullies and stuff like that. Whereas it could have taken a bit more of a tack to it and gone like, this could be anyone. Do you know what I mean? Like this really like.
What do you think? Like kind of going off of this scene as well. Because one of the scenes that I think often like kind of gets laughed about a bit with this movie is like. So C. Thomas Howell is not done yet in The Amazing Spider-Man. He comes back in the final act because it turns out he's also a crane driver. And when he hears Spider-Man's in trouble and needs to be able to swing to Oscorp, he rallies his buddies in all the cranes to line up so Spider-Man can swing to Oscorp Tower. That again, that's that evolution of that kind of like New Yorker spirit that's in a lot of Spider-Man things, but it's another beat that I actually quite enjoy for like again
love it
as a really good expression of Spider-Man. Yeah, I really like that beat as well.
I've written in my notes, I've never been like emotionally moved by construction.
You move like, those cranes, boys.
Like, I'm like clutching my chest, like, oh, this is beautiful. Do you know what I mean? It's like then you never know those kind of kind deeds you might do, how they might come to repay you, and it's kind of like, that's what it said to me, and it's like how much that for Spider-Man that's just part and parcel of being Spider-Man, but for that guy that has like changed his fucking life.
Yeah.
And this is a way to repay Spider-Man. So it's like, yeah, people might laugh at it, but it's like,
that is a great scene.
Is it any more silly than when like I think it's Joey Diaz in Spider-Man 2 where he's like, we're New Yorkers, you got to get past us.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Is it
You
any
can't
more
give
silly
rule
than
me.
that? It's just like, yeah, it's that on a grander scale.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is New York coming together. Like, like, I don't know. I don't know. It's almost up there with the Statue of Liberty coming through New York in
Ghostbusters
2.
2.
Yeah, New York coming together with good vibes.
Yeah.
To get the job done. There's some parallels there, definitely. Apart from there's no. Is it Bobby Brown or there's no good tunes?
No, no Chad Kroeger in this one.
That's it. Yeah. A hero can save us.
The closest we get to an anthem is him skateboarding him skateboarding to a Coldplay song. I think that's the closest we kind of get.
Coldplay song.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I had to Google that. I was like, what is that song? God, Coldplay.
Like Till Kingdom Comes or something like that. It's something like that.
It feels like one person we haven't talked. It feels like one person we haven't talked about in this is Emma Stone. So
yes.
as we start to like wind things down, what do you think of Emma Stone in this film?
Yeah.
Andy?
So I know we have ragged on this, and it's like it is only because I care about Spider-Man so much, and it feels like this is a film that really has elements that really are so close to working, but it's so clearly marred by different intentions coming in at different points in time, and Fred's piling in and crashing and kind of going nowhere. But the main thing that kind of allows this film to really stand up and kind of have its own identity more than anything else that it's doing is in kind of Garfield and Stone. And it's just, I remember when that casting was announced and just thinking, Christ, that's perfect casting, because she particularly Stone, and as it carries over into the second one as well, their chemistry is just so, it's got this, it's quite authentic as kind of like an awkward teenage burgeoning romance where they both don't quite really know what they're doing, but the only thing that they really do know is that they really do like each other. And it helps that they were dating behind the scenes, but like it is that sort of chemistry that is just so like lightning in the bottle for movie romantic pairings like this, and it gives the film again those moments of heart and character that do work in this. One come from the kind of nature of Spider-Man's character on a kind of like DNA level, but also from the chemistry between these two, and allowing even the kind of like silly bits, like there's that scene on the balcony where he's like, I've been bitten, and she's like, yeah, so have I, and it's kind of like it's a bit like that's a weird lie, but like I like the way they play it, because they're kind of like they are just being like slightly awkward and teenagery about it.
Yeah, I like that stuff. I love that moment when she invites him round for dinner, and she like kind of gets nervous.
Did you bring your suit?
Yeah. Or like even when she invites him round and they're in like the hallway of school, and she says to him something to like the effect, like she's like, I forgot to write the apartment on there, and it's very sweet and kind of like,
we're having Branzino.
Yeah. I think their relationship is like, I think if they'd kind of lent into this being like a romantic comedy, and oh, by the way, he's Spider-Man, could have like really like the thing is that this film is a hodgepodge and a bit of a mess of what it really wants to do, and there's kind of a lot of like threads dangling and stuff like that don't get pulled on. But like I think the stuff between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone works like really well, and she gets this brilliant line.
I'm in trouble.
when he eventually tells her that he's Spider-Man.
That's also
like, I love that.
That's an element of like this take as well, that like he likes her so much and is so wants to kind of be with her that he doesn't really try to hide the fact that he's Spider-Man from her, which is quite a nice significant change from like the Tobey Maguire ones, where he is trying so hard to keep that from MJ for 2 films. With Gwen, he's just like he's so nervous to want to have something genuine with her, that he's just straight out like, I'm Spider-Man. With the weird like whip.
Yeah, that I did write in my notes. Is that sexual harassment? Is that sexual assault? Like that kind of like
whips to him. It may be. He is a bit creepy, actually. He keeps going up fire escapes and just hanging around. He's
a real horn dog. This is the horniest Spider-Man I think we've ever got. In the fact that he's just always like, I think when they're sitting on the bleachers at one point, he's like, I just love kissing.
Yeah.
And it's just like, he always just wants to, and like, when he takes her out for that swing beforehand, he's just all like sweaty and disheveled and like kind of like, it's like, he's just like pulling her close and stuff. And it kind of feels like all right, Peter, like, as the spider bite affected your libido,
there is a
really
bit of
like
an Edward Cullen
dog all of a sudden.
An Edward Cullen vibe now that I think about it, isn't there? Particularly this version of him.
Yeah, I think she's an absolute like, I don't know, like North Star in this film of just kind of
same for the sequel as well.
She kind of nails everything she does, right? Like she just like, yeah, she's
perfect.
She's amazing. Well, so but before we wrap things up on this film, is there anything we've missed, Andy? Is there anything that on this film that you kind of feel like is a glaring admission?
I would be remiss if I didn't not tip the cap to James Horner, as you've kind of highlighted in some of the clips you've picked, and you said as well, like some scenes the music does a lot of the heavy lifting. And James Horner being a contributed to many Amblin films, so he is someone I've gotten to know quite intimately through my own podcast, and this is one of his last like completed film scores he did before his untimely death in a plane crash, and it's a really sweet, emotional, playful score when it needs to be, but like you say, it really carries a lot of the big sweeping moments of like sentiment in a way that it feels quite affecting. So yeah, I just tip of the hat as always to the great composer that was James Horner.
Yeah, like I love how jaunty it is in some aspects.
Yeah,
like, I played you before we got on a part of the it's playing right now, the playing basketball from the original score, and it's got this kind of like almost like Home Alone-esque element to it that like I really dig, and like I love the way that he knows the assignment right, and it's like when we need something that is emotionally devastating, we get something emotionally devastating. When we need something that is kind of like showing the playful, fun nature of Spider-Man, you're going to get that as well.
Yeah,
like
consummate professional.
James Horner absolutely knocks out the park. So I want to ask you, you've shot your load early on this. I wanted to ask you, where does this rank in the kind of pantheon of Spider-Man content? But this is bottom of the barrel for you, right?
This is bottom of the barrel. Let me just load up my letterbox list very quickly to remind myself where I've put all the other ones. This one's bottom, and next is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. There isn't a lot between these two for me. I think they suffer from a lot of similar problems where there's so many threads going on. The second one I enjoy a bit more because it's a lot more colourful and a lot more sorry, John. But the sequel shot by Dan Mendel is like just much more comic booky and looks like bright poppy and like an Amazing Spider-Man sort of comic book feel, and it's hard not to get swept up in that kind of bubblegum look sometimes. And then it would go Spider-Man 3, then Far From Home, then the first Raimi Spider-Man, Homecoming, Into the Spider-Verse, and then Spider-Man 2, which is one of my favorite films of all time, and also just still the perfect superhero film for me.
I guess you're excited for No Way Home, right? Especially the fact that we're getting Alfred Molina back.
Yeah, I am excited as a Spider-Man fan, and I like the idea of kind of blending universes. It feels like a the only way that like Marvel can really go now. But we've already been hurt by like the Spider-Man sequels that throw in about 6 villains at once. So I hope they've learned their lessons from the times that they've done it before and it's not quite worked.
Yeah. I will be devastated if we don't get Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, righto.
In No Way Home. Like that's you can keep your Electros. You can even keep your Green Goblin. I don't know. No. I will buy a ticket opening day for anything that happens. Yeah.
But yeah, I've got my tickets.
Check me at the cinema with about 5 other people watching the card counter because Willem Dafoe is in it. So let me ask you, where does Andrew Garfield rank for you as a Spider-Man? Then is he bottom of the barrel for you?
Yeah, but not like it's not because I dislike him as Spider-Man. I think he's really trying for something here and isn't quite serviced. He isn't that well serviced by the material he's given, but I think what he's doing and the approach he's doing it, he's such a kind of empathetic performer who likes kind of making his characters quite messy, and he like brings that to Peter Parker as well. And I do like it, but I think probably out of the 3 it would be my least favorite. And I think largely Tobey Maguire is my favorite just because of how much that's ingrained in childhood nostalgia more than anything else.
Yeah, the thing is, like, Andrew Garfield has proved himself time and time again of like what a fantastic actor he is. Like, I'm not sure how you felt about Tick Tick Boom, but like,
yeah, I liked it.
Even the views on that film, you cannot deny that like he is kind of like an A+ like actor in like he carries that film. It's kind of like he's almost there for like every single frame of it, and like kind of is there with a plum of just like I'm gonna throw myself into it. And like even on like I don't know, seeing him, he seems confused like in some regards to like where is he from? Like he has this kind of weird transatlantic accent. Like 'cause I remember seeing him first of all, like staying up late and watching Sugar Rush on like Channel 4.
Oh yeah, I remember Sugar Rush.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you remember. It was a kind of like lesbian comedy drama set in Brighton, and like Andrew Garfield played like the kind of neighbor next door who had affections for the lead character. And I remember him from then. So like to kind of watch him develop into this like actor who kind of like I'm always excited what he's going to be in next, because he's kind of like what he's worked with Scorsese. He's kind of he won an Oscar working with Mel Gibson, and like but like he feels like he's got like there's great things to come. Andrew Garfield. I think like his like you mentioned that Hollywood Round Table thing, like feels like he's got his head screwed on, especially like the things that these comic book and these kind of mega blockbusters could be doing feels like a really either really business savvy or kind of like he's actually socially conscious and is aware of what Hollywood could be doing better. I think like that's
I agree.
Yeah, to share that on such a massive platform is a great thing. So yeah, Andrew Garfield, despite being the worst Spider-Man, seems like a great guy.
And still a good Spider-Man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He just got dealt the wrong cards, right? He got dealt a pack of jokers. Right. As I like to wrap these episodes up before we get to some scorings, did you manage to find any Coppola connections within this film? And by that I mean, did anyone who worked on this film work with a Coppola elsewhere in their career?
I found a few, actually.
Let's go one for one. You hit me with one, I'll hit you with one.
So to kind of just bounce straight off of Andrew Garfield, he, of course, worked with Coppola in Mainstream, which is available in the UK now. I feel like you're the man to ask about this. Is it on iTunes now?
Yeah, it got like quietly shitted out quite recently.
I would like to watch that.
By the way, mainstream is out now. Which, yeah, I would really like to, that. Feels like he's kind of he's channeling what like Jake Gyllenhaal was doing in Okja, almost. Like those two, I think, like are kind of battling out to be like, who can fucking do the weirdest shit, man? Who can kind of like go out there and really freeform jazz a performance? And I'm loving it, especially as a Nick Cage fan. It's like, I'm always there going, who's the next Nick Cage? Who's going to like have this really burgeoning great early career and then drift off into obscurity and then come back as a great actor? So Emma Stone, let's throw that one out there. She is in The Croods and The Croods: A New Age with Nicolas Cage. Over to you, Andy.
I'll get the big obvious one out of the way. Martin Sheen, he's in Apocalypse Now, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. You may have heard of it.
It's kind of a big deal. Rhys Ifans, here's like a couple of weird ones. He is in A Christmas Carol from 2001, which had Nicolas Cage as the voice of Marley's ghost.
Great pick.
And he's also in Little Nicky and Human Nature with Patricia Arquette, who at the time of their release was married to Nicolas Cage.
Great pick. What's my next one? Irfan Khan is in the Darjeeling Limited with Jason Schwartzman.
And is also in Jurassic World.
Yes, also shot by John Schwartzman. Yes, of course.
John Schwartzman. So, yeah. Writer Steve Kloves. So, way before he wrote all the Harry Potter films, he wrote a film called Racing with the Moon, which stars Nicolas Cage and
Sean Penn, I think.
Penn.
Yeah.
So that's a great one. So
that was an early days one. My next one I had was Avi Arad, who is a producer on this movie and has been at Marvel since like the early 90s and is particularly really heavily involved with the Sony produced Marvel movies. He was, of course, a producer on the 2 Ghost Rider movies starring Nicolas Cage.
Lovely. Well, we shone a light on James Horner earlier in this chat. So James Horner did the scores for both Windtalkers, which starred Nicolas Cage, and Captain EO, a film that Francis Ford Coppola, a short that he did in the 1980s, which stars Michael Jackson and Angelica Houston.
I never knew that existed. Wow.
Which will be covered on this podcast at some point, despite the fact it stars Michael Jackson. Do you have any more Coppola connections?
I have a couple more. I have a couple more direct ones, and then some of the more where it's a bit of a kind of 7 degrees of like a couple of where there's a bit of a lily pad in between. But another direct one I found was Pietro Sciala, who's one of the credited editors on this film, also edited Kick-Ass, which of course stars Nicolas Cage as Big Daddy.
One of the other editors on this film is Alan Edward Bell, who was the first assistant editor on North, which has a voice cameo from Nicolas Cage's brother, Mark Coppola. And keeping on North, J. Michael Reaver was the production designer on this and North.
I've seen North.
I'll chuck a couple more at you, and then we'll get to your last ones. The casting director, Francine Masler, worked on 50 Shades of Grey, which is also lensed by John Schwartzman. Oh, no, wasn't. Actually,
he did the sequels, didn't he?
He did the sequels, but I've recently covered 50 Shades of Grey. So
it's on the brain.
And Simone, or S1M.
Oh, yeah. I can remember that poster.
Which, yeah, again, John Schwartzman was the DOP. And last but not least, the set decorator, Leslie Pope, worked on Funny People, Seabiscuit, Simone, and The Family Man.
Delightful stuff. I've got a couple more. Like C. Thomas Howell we mentioned earlier was Pony Boy in The Outsiders. who else have I got? I've got Sally Field, who I've connected via Robin Williams and the Francis Ford Coppola film Jack.
And then in Missed Outfire, right?
Yeah. And then Laura Ziskin, another producer on this, produced To Die For, which stars Matt Dillon, who was both in The Outsiders and Rumblefish, directed by Francis Ford. And my last one that I had was Alvin Sargent, who's one of the writers. Probably the more tenuous link one because it was like a film I've never heard of. Also wrote the Al Pacino F1 movie, Bobby Deerfield. And of course, Pacino was in the Godfather trilogy. We did quite well for the connections there. There was good. As I kept mining through, I was like, oh, there's more here than I thought.
Yeah, like the thing is, I have to like call it a day at some point because you can start getting into like runners, and it's like, this guy was a runner on this, and this person did this. Oh, I've got one last sneaky one that was on another page of my document, which is Kim Barrett, the costume designer, was also a costume designer on Three Kings, which was directed by David O. Russell and has a performance by Spike Jonze, who at the time was married to Sofia Coppola. So
there you go.
With all of those connections out of the way, Andy, let's rate this film. And we have a unique way of rating films on this podcast, which is asking what would be the perfect wine pairing for this film.
So I don't know my wines very well. I just know I like red. I do think The Amazing Spider-Man would be a red. Just, there's a lot of red on that suit. But I always do try to remember like the labels of wines that I've liked whenever I've been out. So like if I then ever find myself craving the taste of the grown-up grape juice, as I like to call it, I'll aim to try and find that label that I know I've tasted and I've liked. But for me, The Amazing Spider-Man represents a bottle of red where I've picked up a label thinking that it's one that I've tried before, but then realise I've gone wrong.
It's just Ribena.
Wait a second. This is like
0%.
It's like this other one, but I've been had.
That feels like the perfect description for this film. It's got notes of the film that you like. It's got it's got a slight flavour profile, but at the end of the day, it feels quite tastes quite vegetative and earthy. Yeah, it's a little flat.
A couple of points, you're like, that tastes a bit different. I don't mind that. That's good. But then, then that will get a bit lost itself as well.
Yeah, there's a weird aftertaste in your mouth. After you're like, I don't think I'll be visiting that one again. So, is this a bottom shelf, middle shelf, or top shelf wine? AKA, is this film good, bad, or real bad?
I think it's probably. I think middle shelf. I know, like it's not a film I think is great by any means, but I don't think it's poor. I think it's fine. It's fine.
Perfect. Now, getting on to some more questions. Which Coppola member would you keep? But in doing so, you get rid of the filmographies of the entire rest of the family.
I know a couple of people have said this one, but I feel like it's a way that you can kind of have the best of both worlds a little bit, because as well as being a fan of Spider-Man, being a fan of Francis Ford, and being a fan of the Godfathers, there's something I'd argue I'm probably a bigger fan of than all those things combined, and that is the Rocky franchise. So, in order to also keep the Godfather trilogy, I'm going to keep Talia Shire, so I can have my Rocky franchise and have my Godfather trilogy.
Somebody's listened to my Rocky 3 episode
Yep.
and found the cheat code.
I was just like, that is
Somebody's
perfect.
found the left down, right up, R2, L2.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's the perfect answer. And absolutely, I completely cribbed that from that episode just because there's no better answer in my eyes.
I think Talia Shire might be the kind of like the secret weapon of the Coppola family. And just like, well, not only has she got this kind of really interesting and like stellar career of her own and stuff like that, it's like she is probably given us one of the most productive members of the Coppola family, Jason Schwartzman, who, like,
I was going to say, and she's also the only reason we're talking about this film today, really.
yeah. And even that is a stretch because it's only by marriage.
Yeah.
Like he was Jack Schwartzman's son already, but I think I read in an article somewhere that Nicolas Cage referred to him as his cousin, and it's like, nice. if John Schwartzman was at Christmas dinner at the Coppola family estate, he's getting talked about on this podcast.
Yeah.
And Talia Shire, as I said on that episode, might be the right answer. I've got a lot of affection for Talia Shire, especially the Rocky films. People would have heard last week my episode on Rocky 4, which has turned out to be a real mammoth episode because it's not just one guest. I had a phone call last night, time of recording, with Liam Dempsey from the Rocky 3 episode, all about his opinions on the Rocky 4 director's cut. And we kind of
Rocky 4, Rocky
said we were going to talk for 20 minutes.
Cut.
We said we were going to talk for 20 minutes, and as you'll hear on that episode, we talked for a lot longer than 20 minutes.
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, that is not a cut that deserves 20 minutes. That needs bigger.
Amazing, Andy. That's you've really wiggled your way in and found that cheat, and I love you for it. So, based on this film alone, are the Coppolas the greatest film family of all time?
I probably have to go with no, based on this film alone.
I wouldn't blame you. Andy. I wouldn't blame you at all.
Just on this evidence, I'd have to give it to the Houstons, I think.
Hey, you get some Coppola in there with the Houstons as well. So I'll have it. You get some Roman, you get some Francis. So I'll take the Houstons. They're happy to play second. Yeah. Well, these kind of big like film families, there seems to be some crossover at some point anyway. Whether it's the Arquettes, obviously, with like Nicolas Cage marrying one of them for one, and I think David Arquette crops up in Airheads. So
yes,
John Schwartzman was the DOP on. So there's I love all these crossovers you get. So let's move on to the most important question of this podcast. The thing that everyone wants to know, Andy, is what does Bill Murray say to Scarlett Johansson at the end of Lost in Translation?
I think he says, I believe that if you can do good things for other people, you have a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility. Which is a line I've completely forgot to bring back up, because it's just, this is Uncle Ben. This is how the film rewrites the line, with great power comes great responsibility. And it trips up on it so much that I just had to try and work it in some way. And I forgot to actually bring it into the conversation. It's an awkward line.
Well, yeah, with Bill Murray's delivery in Ghostbusters Afterlife, it feels like the kind of line he might have definitely whispered in our ear at the end of that film.
It's on a par with the energy levels of Martin Sheen's performance. That movie.
Right, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Obviously, you host the podcast. As I mentioned, I've had the absolute pleasure of being a guest on it.
Indeed.
Ramblin and Amblin Podcast. Tell people about that podcast and where people can find it, and where people can find you as well online if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ramblin and Amblin Podcast is a podcast I do with my good buddy Joshua Glenn, and it's a show where we basically work through the filmography of Amblin Entertainment, going through every film in chronological order. So we've already covered some like the big early 80s hitters like E.T. and Back to the Future, and Petrus joined us for Harry and the Hendersons, which was a wild, obscure ride. And we're just getting our foot in the 90s now. So, like, yeah, come along and join us on a ride. There's still plenty more Amblin Entertainment films to get into. You can find that anywhere you get your podcasts. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Ramblin Amblin. I myself, you can follow on Twitter at Andy Gaudion 93. And I'm also up on Letterboxd if you want to keep track of everything I'm watching and what I have to say about it.
Well, Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming and making some Coppola connections with me.
Well, thank you for having me, man. It's been an absolute joy. Great to chat with you again, and I'm loving everything you're doing with this podcast. Particularly and it is, yes, because I'm a big fan, but all the big rocky dives I've just been lapping up. I'm so happy to hear there's so much more coming.
Thank you once again to Andy Gaudion for that amazing chat about all things Spider-Man. If you've seen the new Spider-Man, how does it rate in the pantheon of Spider-Man content that's out there? And where does this film rank for you? I'd love to know your thoughts on The Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man No Way Home. I will hopefully be seeing it Thursday of this week, so yeah, the day after it comes out, if there's still tickets available. I'm pretty slack at stuff like that. I will kind of try and get a ticket on the day, and if it's not there, then I won't go that day. I'll go another day instead. So if you want to get in touch with the podcast, you can do so on all the socials, and it's at Caged In Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. Or if you want to drop me an email, you want to go a bit long form, you want to keep it private, little chat between me and you can drop me an email, cagedinpod@gmail.com. And if you're not listening to Ramblin and Amblin Podcast, do check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. It really does feel like a warm hug of a conversation. And Andy and Josh are fantastic hosts. They almost make me jealous in the way that they kind of came out of the gate running, and their podcast, they perfectly released them on a Sunday as well, and it kind of, they encapsulate, their podcast feels like watching an Amblin movie. It's just this big warm hug of a podcast, and I thoroughly recommend you check that out. As I'm recommending podcasts already, it's time for my little Christmas recommendation section. In the lead up to Christmas, I thought I'd give you a present of some amazing podcasts you could be listening to. And this week's pick is W Rated, hosted by Daisy Edwards and Claire Ellen Hope. And they are looking at the bottom 100 movies as ranked on IMDb. And as somebody who has watched his fair share of bad movies for a podcast, I sympathise with them, empathise with them, and love what they're doing, because they never feel like it's mean-spirited. They're just trying to figure out, why are these films on the bottom 100? And I absolutely love their kind of approach to it, and the way that they kind of... I love the fact that a film that I weirdly thoroughly enjoyed, I Know Who Killed Me, they dedicated like 2 episodes to it, talking about just the full mania and just craziness of that film, with former guest Andrew Pope, and it's an absolute delight. And they've got a whole host of fantastic episodes over on that podcast, so do check out W-rated. As for next week here on this podcast, we will be talking about an absolute modern Christmas classic, which, as I've seen, a lot of podcasts are doing for their Christmas episodes this year because it is an absolute joy. But we will be giving it the full Coppola Connections treatment when I'm joined by Russell Bailey of the Not Just for Kids podcast, and we'll be looking at the Jason Schwartzman starring Klaus. I really can't wait for you guys to hear this. And I know Russell loves this film. I haven't actually recorded this episode yet, but I'm sure it's going to be a lovely burst of Christmas joy in your ear holes just before the big festive day itself. If you love this here podcast and want to support it, please do so by heading over to ko-fe.com to buy me a little digital cup of coffee. The / on that is, of course, Caged In Pod. Yeah, and as I said, you can buy me a digital cup of coffee and just a one-off payment to help keep the lights on over here at Caged In Towers. Or if you want to do a bit more commitment with your support, you can head on over to patreon.com/cagedinpod, where from January you'll be delighted to hear a brand new podcast, which will be twice a month, and it is my deep dives into the films of Francis Ford Coppola's cohort, formerly known as the movie Brats. The first season will be kicking off with a little look at Brian De Palma. You won't want to miss this. I've recorded 2 episodes so far on Phantom of the Paradise with the amazing Jeanette and Daryl Barr of Sudden Double Deep fame, and an episode on Mission Impossible with amazing comedian and podcaster Nathaniel Metcalf, again, that you won't want to miss. And you can all of that goodness for as little as £2.50 or $3 a month. Not bad, eh? Or if you don't want to part with your cash, you can always recommend this podcast to a friend. Let people know. Recommend it to enemies. Recommend it to your family, loved ones, hate ones, everyone. Just recommend it. Look, do you know what? Hire out a billboard and just put up a massive advert that says, "Hey guys, listen to Caged In. It's really good." And Pedros is a really lovely guy who has self-esteem issues and would like you to listen to his podcast. Or you can go through some formal channels and rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Acast, or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. I know every podcast says it to you, but it really does help kind of get exposure to podcasts and stuff like that. So yeah, give me that beautiful 5 stars. It really will help out. Not just get this podcast to more ears, but will boost my self-esteem. Give me that Christmas present of some self-esteem, please, baby. So, as always, I have been Petros Patsilvus, your guide through the crazy world of the Coppola family tree. And remember that if a child is hanging in a car hung by web off of a bridge, to always save them, as you never know if their dad is going to be a crane operator who can help you in your time of need. So, I'll catch you next time as we talk Klaus.